Good evening, everyone. My name is Fritz Schroeder, and I'm the Senior Vice President of Community Impact with the Lancaster Conservancy. Along with my colleague, Kelly Snavely, welcome to the History of the Conestoga River, Part 2, Dammit, as part of Lancaster Water Week 2021, which runs through this coming Saturday, June 12th. Water Week was launched 5 years ago as a community awareness campaign to celebrate the over 1,400 miles of streams and rivers in Lancaster County. These incredible water resources have driven economic development and agricultural growth in our community for generations, perhaps none more important than the Conestoga River. And these streams and rivers are the source of our drinking water. Nearly half of these 1,400 miles are polluted or impaired, but the good news is we can solve this problem in our lifetimes with focused action. Please visit lancasterwaterweek.org to register for one of our remaining events still taking place this week. While visiting lancasterwaterweek.org, we invite you to take the Water Week Pledge, which includes 3 simple action steps we can all take to be part of the solution. Water Week is successful because many partnerships, and this evening, I want to thank our presenting sponsor for the last 5 years, Turkey Hill Dairy. I also want to recognize the Campbell Foundation, Chesapeake Bay Foundation, Keystone 10 Million Tree Partnership, Lancaster County Community Foundation, Laxwama, High Foundation, City of Lancaster, Brookfield Renewable, Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay, Atlee Hall, Eurofins, Flyway Excavating, Fulton Bank, St. Boniface Brewing, Lancaster County Clean Water Consortium, Lancaster Newspapers, Stroud Water Research, Lancaster General Health, Land Studies, Landis Homes, Science Factory, Inframark, Natural Light Films, Octorara Native Plant Nursery, Lancaster County Conservation District Modern Art, and Donegal Trout Unlimited. Wow, what an incredible group of sponsors. We are so thankful for your continued support. It's amazing. A portion of all Water Week sponsorship dollars goes to support the Lancaster Clean Water Fund being administered by the Lancaster Clean Water Partners and the Lancaster County Community Foundation to support on-the-ground implementation. There is funding available for large and small scale clean water projects, and you can learn more by searching Lancaster Clean Water Fund or visiting the Lancaster Clean Water Partners website. I also want to thank our community partner for this evening, Lancaster History. You can explore our community's history at their campus through museum exhibitions, President James Buchanan's home, the Tanger Arboretum, and through their research center. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our presenter for this evening. Ben Weber serves Lancaster Township as its municipal engineer. He grew up and resides in Manheim Township along the Conestoga River. As a civil engineer for more than 35 years, he has always been fascinated with water. A few years ago, he asked the unfortunate question, where does the name Bridgeport come from? His thirst for local history has been unquenched ever since. Welcome, Ben.
Ben, I'm going to need to ask you just to unmute yourself and then we can start. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Kelly. And thank you, Fritz, for that introduction and for this time to share some of this damn joy that I have about the Conestoga River. It's really pretty exciting to consider all the things that have been done in, along, and to the Conestoga. Both the wonderful and the not so wonderful. So we'll be getting into quite a few of those things. Now, before we really get into the meat of Dammit tonight, I do want to touch base on last year. There was a presentation done during Water Week with Ruth Hawker. And that webinar recording is still available to viewers on the Lancaster Conservancy YouTube channel. So it can be found pretty easily. Just look on their YouTube channel under History of the Conestoga River. It'll pull up this image and you'll be able to see what happened during that presentation. But here's a brief outline of what we talked about. So you got your Conestoga 101. Is it a creek? Is it a river? Where are the headwaters? Why is it called the Conestoga? And then we talked about natural forces, how geology and the water affects the Conestoga, how it created the river that we see today. Then we talked about settlement patterns as white Europeans moved into the area and created the landscape that we see today and developed the community that we're all a part of. Then we went into industry and transportation, looking at how those impacted the Conestoga River. On the fun side, there's the recreational aspect of the history of the Conestoga River, which is not to be underplayed. It really does tie people to the river in a way that's very important. Lastly, we looked at conservation and what the future of the Conestoga would be. Now this year, we're going to be talking about various improvements that have been made to the Conestoga. I'm not sure that improvements is the actual word we should use, but that's what it's been called over the years, physical improvements that have been done. Then we'll talk briefly about the Conestoga Navigation Company and the Slackwater Navigation. Conestoga is not a typo. That was one of the alternative spellings that was used to talk about the Conestoga, as we call it today. Then we'll get into the various impacts of these improvements, like I said, both good and bad. And then we're going to touch base on a few of my crazy, impossible ideas for what needs to be done in order to let the Conestoga really heal itself. So as we look at history, and if you read any of the old journal articles from the Lancaster County Historical Society archives, as it was called back then, there was always several pages of some old white guy pontificating about the wonderfulness of history. And tonight is going to be no exception. My view of history is that it is indeed the first science. I am an engineer, and engineering is essentially applied science, that we use lessons learned, we then develop infrastructure changes that we want to make and try to make things better. But we need to look at history over and over again in order to determine what choices we're going to be making. Now, it's not just nostalgia. History isn't just what happened to me or what happened to you individually or what happened to our family. And it's simply not just the news, what happened last week. We'll be looking back at the pandemic of COVID-19 for the next several decades, but it really doesn't turn into a full understanding of history probably for another 50 to 100 years. But I think history is so exciting when it provides hope for us, when it inspires our imagination. I travel throughout the county and I can just see the landscape that the way the things used to be. I can see a structure that was in a completely different condition than what we see today. And for me, that inspires hope. For me, that says that things don't always have to be the way that they are today. That we have at every single moment the ability to influence what the legacy will be that we leave behind us. So I hope that you'll delve into these stories, jump into the imagination, look at some of this science, and then figure out how you want to be involved in passing on to the next generation and the generations in the future what it is that we're trying to achieve today. But mostly history, I believe, teaches us humility, the lessons learned. And we'll learn some of those tonight. We'll go over them. It really teaches us humility to ponder and make sure that we're making the right decisions. Unexpectedly, I had a miraculous thing happen to me while I'm studying the history, is the connection that it makes to others, not just to the people in the past, the stories in the past, but also to other people who are avid historians, to other people who are professional historians, connections with people at Lancaster History, at Lancaster Conservancy, at the LNP, people like Todd Roy, for example, the Conestoga River Club, Adam Zern, and the things he's doing with Uncharted Lancaster and reaching out to our youth in extremely creative ways. And then especially, I've had the privilege of working with Don Kautz. Don came out with this wonderful book earlier this year, and I commend it to you. It's a terrific reference of a variety of things of history. Don is terribly well organized, terribly diligent, and a real joy to work with. He and I have done presentations throughout the county about the Slackwater Navigation, and I look forward to us having chances to do that in the future. So let's get into these improvements that were made. Now, improvements started essentially with fords crossing the Conestoga. You can see here this terrific illustration by Mike Abel of people walking across a waterway, colonists essentially, and they got wet. The fords were basically shallow places where you could make a passing across the Conestoga. This is a map that is of East Lampeter Township, and you can see East King Street or Old Kings Highway, if you will, Lincoln Highway. It's then where the old Abram Whitmer Bridge crosses over the Conestoga. This is what's referred to as North Conestoga Drive, as it becomes then Rank Mill Road. Then this was Rank Mill, which we'll see pictures of later. It spanned the Conestoga and had a mill on each side, but there was a ford below it so that people could cross over the Conestoga River a little more safely. Most of the time they'd be getting their feet wet, but it was a safer place for people to cross. So these fords were one type of improvements. Another type of improvement are the culverts, piping the entire Conestoga. This, up near the headwaters, is the first culvert, if you will, that drains the Conestoga River through it. Now here it's more of a creek than it is a river, but if you follow that main stem all the way up, this is where the first piping is. And this is a culvert underneath the Pennsylvania Turnpike that the Conestoga River drains through. Another type of improvement are bridges. This is the first bridge on the Conestoga main stem up near Morgantown. And this is a picture of the bridges that are at the mouth of the Conestoga as it drains into the Susquehanna River. So quite a difference, as you can tell, from where it is considered more of a creek to where it has a bit more of the grandeur that folks attribute to rivers. Now we're going to get into the meat and potatoes tonight of dams. This is one of the few mill dams that still exists. This dam has been around for quite some time. It's located where Bouchong Road crosses over the Conestoga, and then the road turns into Quarry Road near the Talmadge Quarry. But most of the times that there was a dam and a mill, there was also, like I said, a ford, or there would be a bridge. In later years, there were covered bridges. A lot of those covered bridges then got converted to reinforced concrete bridges. So wherever you had dams, you generally had a mill or a ford and a bridge. But some of the other bridges that are attributed not so much to roads as they are to other features, such as the city waterworks. Now, this is a location that you might recognize. This is Walnut Street Extension. Pleasure Road comes in here, and there's a traffic signal, small parking lot. This is a pretty well recognized bridge that connects over to the city's filtration plant. Now, I want you to keep this bridge in mind because you're going to see it several times in the next couple of pictures. From the same basic perspective, you can see that bridge that I was mentioning, and this is the city's second waterworks. Again, it's completely gone. Walnut Street Extension blows through this whole area right here. Essentially, this is Pleasure Road coming down. And the landscape here has changed pretty dramatically. But this area also became a real recreational spot. Here's that same bridge that I was saying to keep an eye on. And you can see families and kids getting together, having a grand old time, swimming down here. It was pretty close to the railroad bridge. You can see the stone arch, and here's the bridge I told you to keep an eye on. This is one of the stone arches of the railroad bridge that connects Lancaster to Philadelphia. There's a dam right here. Now, interestingly, this dam was installed not to hold water back, but to stop combined sewer overflows from heading upstream into the city's waterworks. So that's a pretty interesting backflow stopper, if you will, to keep the combined sewer overflows from tainting the water that the city was providing. But like I said, that wasn't the first. That wasn't the first waterworks. This was the second waterworks. The first waterworks was built in 1837. No modern filtration, and the river pumped its own water up to the reservoir along East King Street. Now that dam that's right there is pretty much entirely eroded away. And if you're a kayaker, you've gone through here and you've probably seen this arch, but now you can get a sense of where that waterworks used to be. But this is a super important dam because it created what I refer to as Bridgeport. Now, that old waterworks was located right here. Just to orient yourself, this is East King Street crossing over the Conestoga River. This orange dashed line, that's the route that the steamship paddle wheel boat, the Lady Gay, used to take people from the trolley drop-off area down to Rocky Springs and People's Bathing Resort. Just upstream from here, there was the Conestoga Inn with its elevated dance hall, the boondocks and the boathouses that lined along the Conestoga River, the Tell's Hayne facility, Rank Mill and its dam. This is where I was talking about a ford that went across just below the Twin Mills. Conestoga View is located here, Thaddeus Stevens School. This is that reservoir that I was mentioning along East King Street that the waterworks, first waterworks, used to pump up into this location. Also, this is South Duke Street that connects across the Conestoga River. But this Bridgeport area was just a phenomenal place where lots of boating, lots of recreation was taking place. Now, there are several purposes for dams, several useful purposes. One would be milling, doing the work that humans and their animals couldn't do. Dams also settle out things such as sediments that we don't want to get into, say, our water or other things that we want to extract for either drinking or other purposes. And like I said, backflow prevention, if you don't want something moving upstream. In a handful of instances, the various dams that were here in the county, they were converted to generate electricity, but not with a tremendous amount of effectiveness. So they were replaced by other power sources. There were, however, also some unanticipated benefits of flood controls, recreation, like I said. The still waters then froze over much faster, allowing ice harvesting or ice skating. And it generally beautified the community. If you can imagine, the Conestoga not being so much a river as being a series of step pools, these massive lakes all along the route that you think of today as the Conestoga River. These improvements are done to other waterways all across the country. They're used for irrigation, literally for flood controls, anticipated flood controls, and even fire prevention. So on to the Conestoga Navigation Company, and then its successor, the Slackwater Navigation Company. This is an interesting aspect of our history because it was in response to what we refer to as canal mania, where we were trying to get our products to market. So we needed to build our commerce. We needed to get our products out to Philadelphia, to Wilmington, to Baltimore, and we needed to transport things that we couldn't make. We needed to transport them in. So the canals were a great way to do that. It was just exploding all across the country. Also, the Westward Expansion was a tremendous thing that was going on in the 1800s, really impacted the growth of our country, and it impacted the development of Lancaster. We were also then, because of the Westward Expansion, in competition with other states because we didn't want to miss out on that commercial activity that was going on as settlers were moving west. Now, the main PA Canal was initially proposed to come through Gap in order to reach the Susquehanna. So the folks here in Lancaster set up this company to try to encourage all of the Pennsylvania Canal traffic to come through Lancaster. Now, it didn't exactly work out that way, but it didn't stop our guys from going ahead and doing the navigation company. So this is a map from 1791 showing Philadelphia and showing Wilmington. This is the Susquehanna River, the Schuylkill River, and the Conestoga coming out of Lancaster. Now, it's not a terribly accurate depiction, but here's where the Old Kings Highway was coming through from Philadelphia into Lancaster. And the hope was that a canal was going to be built through the gap that's literally was called, and then tying into the Conestoga and coming down to the Susquehanna. So our guys, like I said, did not want to miss out on that. But to get an idea of transportation back in the day, you can see this wagon. This is not taken from Pennsylvania or even Lancaster, but you can see the wheel ruts. Very common in the dirt roads of our agrarian society, and in colonial days, they would try to place logs perpendicular to the travel to stay out of the wheel ruts and to get through these marshy areas. These were called corduroy roads. So essentially those wheels going across would bounce along, and whatever was not well padded, that would be breaking and bashing, and things would, you would get a lot of product damage. So they needed to figure out a better way of doing it. Like I said, the Westward Expansion, the original 13 colonies, and then there was the secession from Great Britain, the Louisiana Purchase, Texas, and so on and so forth, and this constant push out across our continent. Now, the Slackwater Navigation isn't really what a lot of people consider a traditional canal, because you're not scooping out an artificial channel next to a river, as is done frequently, or across a countryside, as was done with the Erie Canal. But it's a literal damming of the river, where there's a dam the whole way across the river. The water is then lifted up, it impounds, and the water level rises, so that a boat can then come along into a lock, rise up, or it would go down depending on the direction of travel. And so you would always need this minimum 4 feet of draft all the way through the navigation system. The earliest engineers that were involved in this, they advised against the Slackwater. They really said, this is not the way to go. You're going to be wasting your money. And our guys were really excited about it, because they said it was going to be cheaper to build, it's going to be quicker to build. So that whole canal mania certainly got in the way of making a prudent decision about how to improve the Conestoga. There was also the idea that a slackwater navigation would be faster to navigate a canal boat, so you'd have less friction because less displacement of water going around a canal boat in a narrow channel. So with the wider step pools, you'd be able to then just pull that boat along as if it were in a normal lake. The biggest problem though, these were immensely costly to maintain. They just started falling apart immediately after they got them completed. The other weird thing is that nothing along the Susquehanna was built for a whole decade to come. So you could get to the Susquehanna, but you couldn't go up or down. So our guys just really jumped on this super fast to build something really cheap and immediately had problems. Now, down at the mouth of the Susquehanna, this is a map of the safe harbor area that is where the Conestoga deposits out into the Susquehanna River. And this is a phenomenal depiction of lock number 9. Absolutely no vestiges of lock number 9 today. You can see a little rivulet if you're standing out there that still does drain to here. But what's really cool is that you can go to Safe Harbor Park and see lock number 8, and that's up here. There's also a bridge that goes right across the Conestoga here. Now, if you're standing there, it's going to be very confusing because the lock number 8 is so far away from the Conestoga. So it sort of looks like it's a narrow barn, stone foundation. It's fenced off. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to convince Brookfield to allow a sign to be placed here to help folks know what it is they're looking at. But it makes you wonder, how could this possibly be related? And that's because the water was so much higher and the water was so much wider. Now, there's a lot of legacy sediment and so forth that's filled in over time that also blocks it. But a buddy of mine, Ed Nett at Ritu Associates, he helped develop this depiction of what we see today. And these are contour topography and the Conestoga flowing down. And this essentially is where lock number 8 is, that depression. And then we laid on top of that a dam and then the water surface elevations so that you could see that the water indeed did reach that lock number 8. And you can see the massively increased width of the Conestoga because it was so much higher. Now, here these step pools, as you can see, they extend all the way back up to lock 7, and then from lock 7 to lock 6, and so on and so forth. So the darker shading is where the Conestoga is today. The lighter blue is where I've calculated the elevation of the Slackwater Navigation to be. And thanks to Martha at Lancaster History for helping me with these base maps and getting a lot of this information sorted out. The folks at Lancaster History have just been a super help. So real basic history on the Conestoga Navigation Company. As I said, the Pennsylvania Canal was authorized by the state in March of 1824. The company literally organized here in the following year in 1825. They sent out for bids and hired a contractor, Caleb Hamill, out of New York, who I think was probably working on the Erie Canal, and then he wanted to take on a project down here. So they signed the contract in 1825, got started in following year, and then they really had a goal of July the 4th, 1826, we want to have our first lock done. They got close, and they had a big celebration that's fun to read about. Then they continued on the following year, and then they started seeing these damaging floods. And one of the problems that I don't think they fully recognized was our whole landscape all throughout the county was changing. I mean, we were taking down Penn's Woods and turning it into the garden spot. When you go from forest, woodland, to agricultural fields, you are tripling the amount of runoff that's coming off of those areas. let alone the impervious areas, the roofs, the streets that were being built, and the erosion. That we didn't have a good sense of conservation of land. So the agricultural practices were very rudimentary in terms of trying to keep the soil on the land. So there was always this increased flow that they were dealing with. They reported it being complete January the 2nd, 1829, and operations then began in spring. Now you'd think, why would they wait so long? And that's because in January, the step pools were all frozen. You can't send a canal boat down a canal that's frozen. So these step pools, like I said, they were all covered with ice. They had to wait for the ice to thaw, and immediately that lock number 9 down near the mouth of the river, it was damaged. It was almost destroyed. So it took them another year to rebuild it and to resume operations. Then a couple years later, there was another flood. And then ultimately in 1833, just 4 years after they got started, they had a big sheriff's sale. Smart guy, Edward Coleman, he, local iron magnate, he then picked up the whole kit and caboodle for a song and formed a new company, the Slackwater Navigation company from Lancaster to Susquehanna. And he invested a whole bunch of money because he was running Safe Harbor Village and wanted to be able to convey back and forth up and down the Conestoga. He also removed several of the dams. So if you're ever doing any research or reading into the Conestoga Navigation or the Slackwater Navigation Company, it gets confusing because the lock numbers, literally the numbers assigned to each dam and lock, they changed over the years. So it kind of gets confusing, like I said, when you're comparing notes. Now, ultimately, navigation ceased in 1857. Obviously, the Civil War was a huge impact, and that sort of stopped things from happening. But then the final sale split up all the different improvements and facilities in 1866. And that's when some of the dams were converted to hydroelectric. And we're going to touch base on one of the most famous locks and dams, and that's lock number 1. So up here is the city of Lancaster, South Prince Street coming down. This is this wonderful Ingleside area, the Dirty Old Tavern, Willow Street Pike southbound, Willow Street Pike northbound, going across the Conestoga to Highland Avenue. And this was called Graff's Landing, one of the ports where people could embark, or you could put cargo onto a canal boat. Reigert's Landing was the other similar port, and this is where the County Park entrance is off of Chesapeake Street down at the base of Strawberry Street. There's a nice little townhouse development. Some friends live there. Shout out to Sarah. And if you look, there's a sign there that says Reigert's Landing. That's what it was named for. But that's the reason, is that they had these small ports. But lock number 1, if you travel down New Danville Pike, close to lock number 1 location, you'll see a PHMC blue and yellow marker that is kind of interesting, and it calls attention to the lock number 1 of the Slackwater Navigation System. This is one of the pictures of that dam that was at the lock number 1 location, and that's a picture of New Danville Pike, if you can believe it. It's just a completely different landscape. You think about the drop-off, the sharp banks that we have today all along the Conestoga, the scour that's been happening along it. These step pools covered all of that nasty business, just covered it right over. Now, this is an enormous mill that got placed here, Levan and Sons flour mill that was built. It burned down in the early 1900s, and it used water power to drive the mill machinery. It had a bridge crossing over the Conestoga that then allowed their sacks of flour to be transported across and loaded onto that old railroad that went down to Quarryville. This is an interesting little segment of that bridge. It was repurposed when the Cohos created Maple Grove Park, connected it to the Maple Grove Mill bathhouse area, from the pool to the bathhouse. These piers are still evident in the water. You can go out there and see them today. Now, the impacts of all of these improvements, while they were intentional of what they were wanting to do, there were some adverse side effects, and this is where the damn it aspect of this presentation really kicks in. The thing that I mentioned earlier is that there was this vastly increasing flow of water, changing from the Penn's Woods to the garden spot. We're changing from woodland to agriculture, and water is just flowing in a way that it hadn't before. And these dams, they were built of just timber and stone, so that they really couldn't stand up to what was going on. And those step pools and the ice that I was mentioning, these then in the springtime, as they would thaw, the ice would stack up on top of each other and create these enormous amounts of pressure that just ripped away at the dams. So from the very beginning, they had to fix them and fix them. Unfortunately, they really never made a whole lot of money on this. It was a financial disaster, so they didn't maintain these. Even Edward Coleman just put in a whole lot of money, literally a boatload, thank you, in order to try and bolster these dams, but it just was never enough. And as each individual dam failed, the dam above it had an increased amount of overturning pressure, because the lower dam would allow the water pressure to hold the upper dam in place better. You lose the lower dam, and then that increases that overturning. So it just made each dam above that much more precarious. This is a great photo that shows the construction of what those dams would have looked like. This is not on the Conestoga. This is down on the Peckway Creek, Colemanville. It's pretty neat. These history groups on Facebook, somebody shared this. It's just wonderful, you know, to come across these images. That's essentially to show you how these things were built. And if this is a real positive image, this is at Ingleside, recreating on those still frozen waters. You know, these lakes. If you can imagine the Conestoga at Ingleside today, where the old singing bridge used to be, you'd think there's no way it's that wide. Well, yes, it was, because that lock number 1 dammed up the water, raised it super high so that it could reach all the way up to Strawberry Street in Chesapeake, and it created these wonderful, wonderful lakes and places for even winter time recreation. But the ice then, like I said, just destroyed the dams, and it wiped out Safe Harbor Village, as you can see, did that multiple times over and over again. This is another example of one of the dams. This was one of the improved dams that Edward Coleman did at what we call Slackwater today. And he put these plates over top the dam breast to try and stop that ice damage from happening. But still, the dam breaches happened. And you can see some of this legacy sediment that built up behind it. The legacy sediment is really a nasty thing that happened, because, you know, the agricultural areas, they were just highly erosive, just dumping a lot of sediment. These dams all along the river for all the mills, they were just capturing all this legacy sediment for decades and decades. And then whatever else was dumped into the river, refuse, sewage, woody debris, anything that was being dumped in the river intentionally otherwise, would be trapped behind these dams. And then this is one of the earliest 1824 plans that was put together to show the dams and the lock locations. And you can see how they create these step pools going down. So if this one fails, it's like a series of dominoes. It's going to cause this one to be more likely to fail. And if this one fails, this one, and so on and so forth. So back to that failure, as you can see, stacked up behind the dams was all the refuse and the sediment. This is not part of the dam construction. This is part of what was released by our ancestors and predecessors, people in our community, as they were developing our community and just letting it go down into the ditch, if you will, that we call the Conestoga today. And this has had a tremendous impact then, not just on our own community and the unsightliness of it, but the sediment plume that is visible from the satellite imagery from 2004. You can see Lancaster County, and we contribute our sediment that's been flowing out of the county into the Susquehanna River, and then the sediment plume that ends up going down into the Chesapeake Bay. It's had a tremendous impact, and we're really struggling with how to answer the call. The folks at Water Science Institute and Conservancy, the Alliance for the Bay, have all been working hard to try and figure out how do we build awareness of legacy sediment, how do we identify these areas. Clean Water Partners has taken a tremendous leadership position to help identify the impaired streams using information that's been collected for a long time by the Lancaster County Conservation District. So there's all these agencies that are working hard. Now, this might look like a pretty normal stream bed in Lancaster County, but it really does tell a tale of the legacy sediment that's been built up. And then it seems like it's just a couple of feet, shouldn't be that big of a deal, but when it's 15 feet thick, then you really get a sense that these mill dams, they trapped a tremendous amount of sediment that's been flowing out of these areas. Land Studies, Ritu, and David Miller Associates, a lot of these great engineering firms that are within our county. They're working hard on trying to do stream bank restoration to recreate the floodplain. Rather than constricting the flood flow within a scoured channel, which just continues to erode and continues to erode, we're really wanting to level that out so that when a flood event occurs, then you have relief that can happen so that you're not destroying everything that's along the banks, and you can reduce that flood flow elevation and not have so much of an impact on what's along the streams. Now, just to show the impact of these dams on the floods, this is a reading of high water marks along the Conestoga at the Pennsylvania Railroad Bridge, where there's a gauge. And these high water marks elevations span from 1933 to 2013. And I just basically plotted where those high water mark elevations were. And in 1972, you can see there's that Agnes event, but then it gets really erratic after that. So that kind of supports my theory that Agnes wiped out a bunch of the vestiges of flood control dams that were here with a lot of the mill dams all across the county, including those that were under the Conestoga. So I needed to do a comparison to see, is there another stream close by that might not have had as many mill dams? And this is Swatara Creek going from 1919 to 2015. And you can see it's much more varied. There's that pop of Agnes, and then there's that erratic event. So I'm pretty certain that Agnes really blew out a lot of those flood control features that some of the mill dams were providing. All right, so I hope these things don't get me fired, these ideas that I'm going to share with you. They are completely my own ideas, not vetted by any organization that I'm associated with. So blame me, don't blame anybody else. But I hope my boss doesn't get ticked off about this. So what are we going to do? What happens if we do nothing? Things are still going to stay the way that they are, and they're just going to get worse. Entropy is going to have its way, taking erosion and scour, continuing to send all the sediment that's been stacked up, sending it down to the bay, continuing to pollute and release pollutants that have been stored in this legacy sediment, sending it on down, and just continuing to pollute our downstream waterways. That's not really something that we can abide by. So we need to dig in, just like under the leadership of those agencies that I was mentioning, and under the government, local government, county government, and state DEP. So we need to pull together as a community. There are going to be probably increased costs as we really grapple with these issues and make something substantive happen. But there's a lot of things that can be done by individuals, and this is why Water Week. This is why Water Week is such a great thing, is to get people involved, get people enthused, and take that Water Week pledge, teach your children, and like I said, get involved. So it's a wonderful opportunity to really grapple with these issues. So here I'm coming up on my ideas. Now these ideas, they do get harder as they go on and on. But number one is that we need to fully fund DEP and PennDOT so that they can fulfill their mission. Both of these agencies are struggling under severely limited budget. They just can't do what they need to do. Now that's probably going to be increased taxes or fees of some kind to create that budget to be able to get DEP to do the things that they know they want to do, but they're just understaffed and they're really struggling. Same thing with PennDOT. PennDOT's really struggling with maintaining the things that they have, keeping the roads open, and then they have similar responsibilities to a lot of us local governments, because they are also a permittee, an MS4 permittee, to reduce stormwater pollutants that leave our county. Number two, we really need to make sure that every farm has a conservation plan and that each plan is followed. Now, we've got a lot of farms, and many farms do have conservation plans, and there are many farmers who are following their plans, but there are others that have no conservation plan and have no interest in having one, or others that do have a conservation plan and they're simply not following. So I know that there has been work that's been done to try to identify farmers and farms that really need some help. I know that there's some farmers who are installing best management practices, riparian areas, and they're doing great work out there. But we really need to lend a helping hand to those farms that are all across the county. They make up a tremendous amount of our land surface that generate everything that goes down the Conestoga and the Chickies and into the Susquehanna. Number three, I think it's really important that we determine the necessary cross-sections of the Conestoga waterway itself and to lay down those sharp banks. If you walk out to the Conestoga, the side of the Conestoga, it's rare that you can step down in. It's because of those sharp banks, the scour that's been happening over the years, or where those dams stop back the sediment and then just got chewed away over time. So we really need to figure out, based on our new land areas and our new runoff coefficients, what's the amount of flow that's coming down, and what should those sharp banks look like, so that we can then create those riparian buffers along the Conestoga, and then create the environment for those macroinvertebrates, for the fish, so that it can resemble more closely what its naturalized conditions were. One of the other very difficult things that everybody can be a part of is to learn about invasive species and to learn that these plants, they are vegetative pollution, and we really need to eradicate them from our landscape. Some of them have no business in our community. They're very difficult to stop, but we have to keep after them. And some of them are very harmful to our other native plant species or our native fauna that we have. And it's just right now with the influx of all this vegetative pollution, it's changing everything. So we really need to eradicate our community of all these invasive plants. The first thing we need to do is to understand what they are. So I commend that to you to learn what these invasive species are, what the most noxious ones are, and then get involved in removing them, like I said, from our landscape. The last one that I want to throw out there is really difficult, and this would be to get everything man-made out of the floodplain. So if you've got a bridge going across, we need to get those bridge piers out of the floodplain, get the abutments out of the floodplain. We need to remove any piping that's underneath the Conestoga or conduits. We need to get that out of the floodplain, because you put something man-made in the floodplain, it's going to have to be maintained. It's going to have to be changed. And if you are ripping out the bed of the Conestoga or ripping out something that's along the banks of the Conestoga, it's just going to tear up all of the naturalized riparian areas. So I don't know if this is possible to do in our lifetime. Probably not, and but it's going to be terribly costly to do. But I feel that someday it's important to get everything man-made out of the floodplain. Now, if only we could return to a picture like this. This is, of course, a photograph of by Don Kautz, and it's a lovely spot along the Conestoga. But it shows off some of the sycamore tree with this wonderful lighting, and makes the Conestoga look clear and clean right now. So it's a very attractive picture. Robin nudged to me from Lancaster history this Jacob Eichholz's picture, oil painting picture that is of this wonderful peninsula, if you can imagine. It just almost looks dreamlike to look up into the then city of Lancaster and identify some of the church steeples that are there. And wouldn't it be wonderful if this peninsula were still somewhat in the same condition? And by golly, it is. It's a peninsula that is hardly tapped by any infrastructure, but it's got these sharp banks all along it. So then I'm thinking, wouldn't it be wonderful if there was some large county project that might be happening here that they could undertake to do some pretty substantial floodplain restoration? And sure enough, look at that. My wish is coming true. Looks like some big county project that is being considered. So I think it would be wonderful if this floodplain could be restored, if we could cut back the banks of the Conestoga and really create the floodplain as it should be. Now, what's even more intriguing is not just that peninsula, but also the fact that the county owns a lot of parkland all along the Conestoga. So I'm just super excited with the possibility of floodplain restoration happening, not just where that peninsula is that Jacob Eichholz painted, but to really create a tremendous floodway restoration all along this section of the river and set up a model of the way that it should be. And that's basically if only we had a tremendous amount of time and a tremendous amount of money. My hope is that some consideration of these ideas could be put forth. And I hope that if anybody has ideas or counter opinions that they would like to offer, I hope that there could be discussion along those lines. So lastly, as we're concluding this, I did want to thank so many people and organizations who have helped me along the way, both in direct support and encouragement with different ideas, different images, different maps, different books. It's just been incredible to be a part of this process. And I thank the Lancaster Conservancy and Lancaster History for this opportunity, as well as everything that y'all have done to help us understand our community better and to paint a vision for what our future will be. So throw it back to you there, Kelly.
Thanks so much, Ben. That was a damn good presentation, and there's some really interesting ideas that you threw out there. I just want to welcome all of our attendees today to ask a few questions of Ben here. With our remaining minutes, we'll probably just go over the hour just a little bit to get any questions in that come in. Please use the Q&A button on your screen to ask those questions, just so they don't get lost in the chat. I want to start here with a question from Roger. Was the navigation on the Conestoga more intended to facilitate the transfer of goods to and from the south along the Susquehanna, or to and from the north, like coal and timber?
My guess is that it would be to the south in order to reach marketplaces, but we haven't seen any sort of logs. I haven't been able to find any commercial logs of destinations of where people were going. One of the ideas was that you could book passage from Lancaster on a steamship boat all the way to Philadelphia and then presumably to Paris. So that was some of the advertising that was done. But my guess, and it's only a guess, is that most of the commerce was heading south.
Understood. We have a question from Kat. Does sediment have any commercial value? Is there a business to remove it?
I'm sorry, does sediment have commercial value?
The sediment, the legacy sediment, in removing the legacy sediment and what's left over when it's removed, is there kind of any market in which that could be sold as it's removed, which is a very expensive process?
I don't think there's a large amount of I don't think there's a large commercial market where that's going to be done. Unfortunately, you would have to test and then sift and sort out or counteract all of the toxins that were built up, because it was not just sediment that went down the streams. It was also industrial waste, human waste that until we had a sewage treatment plant in the city, it just all went into the Conestoga. Dead animals, refuse, everything that we were just trying to get rid of, throw it in the river. So I think there would be a fairly difficult time to make that commercially viable, but I'm sure some people have.
We have a question from Mike. I think he's asking about the first Waterworks plant. You mentioned that water was untreated. Were there a lot of health problems at that time related to the untreated drinking water in the community? If you know.
I don't know that there was plumbing for, say, tap water, but there was plumbing that was used for bathtubs, and bathing was sometimes considered by doctors a healthy practice and sometimes not. As Ruth Hawker mentioned last year, there was a bathtub tax at the time. And also water was typically not thought of as a healthy thing to drink, hence beer. So a lot of the folks who had breweries, they were just selling this fermented beverage as something to consume frequently. So the drinking water was not nearly the way that it is today, where it's so much more potable. But folks from the city might be able to answer that question a little bit better. But those are my initial reactions.
We have a question from an anonymous attendee. Do you think the shad will ever come back to the Conestoga? And do you support the removal of big dams along the Susquehanna to welcome back fish migration? Or, you know, are there other options?
Well, I think I've gotten enough trouble. I'm not going to comment on the removal of the big dams on the Susquehanna because those are power sources, heavily regulated. I do hope that they can be better maintained because they are far better built than the timber and rock things that we had in the Conestoga. Will shad ever return? I sure hope so. I hope we can figure out a way to do that. I know that there's a fish ladder that's there at the city filtration plant dam, but I don't think there's ever, not that I've heard, have fish really gone up that fish ladder. It would be my hope that we do see shad and other fish, eel, return to the Conestoga. Funny story, a friend of mine, Mike Hamlin, told me about this crazy story, one of the earliest episodes of ecotourism, and it's around shad, where there was a dam built and it stopped the shad from moving, and then folks moved in the early 1800s and blew up the dam, tore it apart to allow the shad to start running again. Well, that dam got built again, and it got built higher, and then it got torn down again. So I don't remember how the story ends, but shad were very important to our community in terms of fish. And yeah, that would be great if we could do that.
Ben, we have time for one last question. This one's from Susan. What can folks living in the suburbs far removed from our creeks do with their property to help clean up the water quality in the Conestoga?
Number one, stop using fertilizer on your lawn. Number two, stop using fertilizer on your lawn. Number three, pull invasive species, get them out of there. So, and unfortunately, some of those invasive species are things that we love. So I really encourage people to understand the plants that they have around their house, to use native species, to use pollinator loving plants. If you have a house that is draining to the city's combined sewer system, encourage you to disconnect it. Find a different way to manage that stormwater, because all that is going into the city's sewage treatment plant and is causing problems for them. But that's a pretty big ask for people who are wanting to do the right thing. So I applaud you for asking that question. Getting involved in larger groups, I think, is probably the better way to participate and to see a real impact. But I'm really glad to hear that question.
Thanks so much, Ben. I really appreciate taking the time to answer these questions, and I want to throw it back over to Fritz for some final words.
Thanks, Kelly, and thank you, Ben. As I listened to your presentation and watched the rainstorm outside my window, I'm all too aware of the challenges we face with sediment erosion and stormwater overflows. Yet I share your same spirit of hope and inspiration. Lancaster's history is uniquely impacted, in fact, built around the waters of the Conestoga and its tributaries, ultimately flowing into the mighty Susquehanna. I think back to the era when Bridgeport was most popular as a destination for access and recreation along the beautiful Conestoga River. Then came the dams for milling and electricity, and canals for commerce and travel. Today, all of us who tuned in this evening are part of the group that is helping to reinvent the Conestoga River. Efforts to provide and improve access for paddling and fishing, to clean up the legacy refuse and trash, to replant sections with trees, and to research and tell the incredible history as you did this evening, Ben. We need a boatload of help to transform this body of water, there's no doubt about it. Ben, you shared many of the resources and organizations that are active toward this end. You can also help Please volunteer, transform your property to capture and slow stormwater, plant more native trees, help the Lancaster Conservancy preserve existing forests and keep the action flowing. Join Ben with your own crazy possible and ideas. What a wonderful way to put it. There are so many ways for you to get involved. Thank you for joining us this evening and happy Water Week.